So let's talk about specific strategies to hold on to your drivers. There's 5 things. My dad was a preacher and he taught me to list things in 3s and 5s. So I'm going to do 5s. So there's 5 things you need to do really well if you want to hold on to your drivers. Then we'll touch on managers at the end, but a lot of it is going to be crossover between those 2 drivers and managers. So the first thing you want to do is master the first impression. There have been businesses that I've worked for with Patent Logistics and other places that when you get there and you figure out kind of how things run at this company, it is so chaotic. And then there's others that are like, man, this manager, this BC has things locked down. I know exactly who I'm supposed to call if this happens. I know what the process is if this happens. So if you create a chaotic workspace for your drivers to come to, they're not going to stick around very long. Now, some drivers, they are the cause of that chaos. And so maybe they've been with you a while and they're just by nature very chaotic people. Again, that's going to be with any business, right? But if that's the case, then you're going to have some manager training to have the manager work with them and kind of work that out of them and tell kind of lay down the company culture as you want it to be. So you're always going to have those chaotic people, but if they can tell that the manager doesn't even know what's going on, that's a big problem. So master that first impression. The first time from the recruiter, whether that's somebody you have in-house or if you use Bright Flag like we recommend, whenever there's the handoff from the recruiter to the manager, make sure that is a very smooth transition. We know some drivers that continue to reach out to the recruiter for months after they've been hired on, and they don't know that they're supposed to transition to someone in your back office staff or a BC for certain things. So make sure you've got that first impression, which again, you do not get to do over, right? You get to do that one time. So you better nail it. And that really goes a long way with new drivers coming into your business for the first time. And along with that, you need to be really intentional and clear with your communication. And then the final thing on that point is establish really clear timelines. Know the movers and shakers at your terminal. When you're getting your drivers badged, getting them set up to get behind the wheel, getting them uniforms, know the people to call and know the people to talk to so that they're not getting unnecessarily held up because someone along the way dropped the ball or your BC just didn't know who to talk to get a certain administrative task knocked out. So that first impression is critical. And then the second thing goes very much hand in hand with the first one is communicate expectations clearly. One of the biggest reasons that I personally have seen drivers when I was a BC, one of the ways that I tended to lose drivers if I did was I was not clear about what I expected from my team. I told them that they were being hired onto, I don't know, let's say 120 stop route. And then the day that they get 130 stops, they're complaining, they're blowing me up. So you want to make sure you're not promising something you can't fulfill for your drivers. So communicate expectations clearly, lay those out from the start. You can tell them, hey, look, be realistic with it. And a lot of drivers are going to appreciate that more in the long run that, hey, at least you told me straight how it was. They're going to maybe want to come to you if they think it's going to be easier. If they see that you have nice clustered, dense in-town routes, that might be a reason to attract them in the first place. But if you let them get settled on here's what a normal day looks like, you should never expect more than this many stops, that is a recipe for disaster. And you need to make sure that people know this industry has a lot of fluctuation. It changes frequently. Your drivers especially are going to feel that on a day-to-day basis, and even more so during peak season. So make sure you communicate what the job is and what to expect going down the road. Now, along with that, I do want to hit one more point on that real quick. You need to make sure that you audit your BC's leadership and communication styles regularly. As an owner of one of these businesses, especially if you're going to be hands-off, your BC has a certain way of communicating with drivers. And by the way, most BCs are promoted from drivers. And this is not something you go to school for. You don't have to go to get a communications degree to be a FedEx Ground driver, needless to say. They may bring some habits with them that are not great. So audit their style. Listen in on conversations they're having with drivers. Have them send you screenshots of text message conversations they have with drivers. Just get little things that like, hey, have this conversation go with such and such when you said you were going to add stops to their route. If you can see that your BC is either on one hand too soft or they're coming down way too hard on your drivers, then you need to have a conversation and maybe send them to some leadership training, some communication training. It doesn't have to be a lot, just something to let them know, hey, this is an opportunity for you to work on and get better and grow yourself as a leader. So master the first impression, communicate expectations clearly. Number 3, be fair and consistent. Our HR director, Melody, would crush me if she knew I was away in Texas and not saying her favorite phrase. So be fair and consistent with your drivers. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with communicating expectations, because on one hand, you don't want to promise what you can't fulfill. But on the other hand, if you're telling a driver one thing, that they're going to have a certain number of stops, and then they get that same number of stops most days because maybe they have a business route where the stop fluctuation doesn't go way up and down like it does on a residential route. And then you've got this person over here where they've heard you promise this to the other driver, and then their routes are going from 120 stops one day to 180 stops the next day. They're going to be like, wait a minute, why is this driver's route so consistent and mine isn't? So that doesn't mean you have to set up the routes as carbon copies of each other every day. But what it does mean is that when you're applying things like company handbook policy, and to the extent that you're able, the workload of each route, you need to think about it in terms of keeping it fair across the board for each driver in the terms that they will understand as fair. You might think of it being fair on paper, but then if they're complaining to you about something about, hey, my 180 stops, I'm done in 5 hours. The guy over here with 90 stops, he's taking 7 to 8 hours. That guy's who's got a lot more windshield time because he's got more miles, fewer stops, but more miles. He's thinking he's getting a bad deal. So you need to make sure you communicate, and drivers are going to talk, so they know what the other one's workloads are. Make sure you're communicating and setting fair expectations, consistent expectations for what each driver is going to encounter when they work for you. Here's another one that kind of goes along with that. Drivers are creatures of habit. Okay, so drivers are creatures of habit. That's number 4. Now, the way that FedEx Ground is going, it's going much more towards the Amazon model, which is dynamic routes. Back in the day, we used to have what was called automatic work area design, which was the predecessor to DRO. FedEx Ground had a manifest, basically a list of all the streets that belonged on the trucks that would get loaded on particular parts of the belt. So this set of streets goes on this truck, this set of streets goes on this truck. Whether the volume is up or if it's way down, doesn't matter. Drivers doing the same static route every day. We're going away from that. Now the name of the game to stay profitable is creating dynamic routes, matching the number of routes exactly to the number of packages and stops that you get on a daily basis. So you don't want static. So what that means is that drivers are potentially doing streets on Tuesday that they're not doing on Wednesday, or they might be on a different truck on Tuesday than they are on Wednesday because you're running a different number of trucks out on the road. So what that means for drivers is they're coming from how that used to be, especially the ones that are there more than 5 years, migrating these drivers that are used to my truck and my streets, getting them used to, you're on the streets that are assigned to your route. Hate to break it to you, but that's the way this is going. And if you're getting into the space from the first time, I want you to hear that loud and clear. You've got to get with the dynamic routing model to be successful and profitable, and get your drivers to expect that as well. I'm a qual cert trainer. In other words, when new drivers come to the space, I onboard them and I give them defensive driver training to help them be approved to drive. I tell that to almost every class that I do. Expect dynamic routes. Don't expect the same truck day after day. That is really important, that you are able to respect their routines and their expectations when possible, but be ready to break them out of it and show them the goal of, this is how it was, here's how it's going to be. Give them some financial incentives when their routes look way different than they're used to, right? Figure out creative strategies to compensate them, but make sure they have that expectation of your routine, your truck, your route is not always going to be your routine, your truck, and your route. And then the 5th thing here, before I get on to managers, is solicit and incorporate feedback from your drivers. I can tell you this, having done this for 17 years as a driver, nothing means more to me. And when I would do this as a BC for my drivers, nothing meant more to them than when I would get on the truck in the jump seat and ride along with them on their route. That not only lets them feel heard because you're literally right there, but you can get ideas and insights from them because they know these streets day in and day out. They know what's out there. They know what these routes look like. They know the time constraints of businesses. They know the crazy hours of this place over here or that place over there. And as we get express integration in the ground network, this is going to be absolutely paramount for you to do. Get a system where the drivers feel heard to solicit feedback from, know that their voices are being heard and giving ideas, and you incorporate those ideas when you're able to into their routes so that they can feel like they're able to complete their routes in a good amount of time, safely, not feeling like they have to rush around. So routing is a good example of that, but incorporate feedback from all areas of your business. If someone feels like something isn't fair in terms of pay or anything like that, you want to know what they are thinking, because I guarantee you the driver pool themselves, not just your drivers, but even the drivers across the belt working for the other contractors, they know the story of how you are running things on your ship. Okay, so make sure you don't want to be the last one to hear that, right? So get that feedback from your drivers on a regular basis. Doesn't have to be a long thing, but maybe you send out an annual survey through SurveyMonkey or something like that. Or maybe twice a year, just say, here's 5 questions. Tell me how you feel about working at this company. And here's some things I want to know. Get that feedback and incorporate it into your planning, into your disciplinary procedures, whatever it is. Make sure you know what the drivers are thinking, and you keep your finger on the pulse of your drivers. Now, notice one thing that I think I mentioned it one time in all of those 5 things. Money. Money is the least, in my opinion, money is the least important factor on this. Now, you've got to be able to pay a fair market price for these drivers. So the wage inflation is a real thing, right? So we are seeing increased wages for drivers as we go, 2023 and beyond. But the drivers that are sticking at companies, and I know several contractors like this, they have drivers that go back 10 plus years and they're not making that much more than they were 10 years ago. They're staying there because of the culture of that team. If you can master that culture, you've unlocked the secret to keeping drivers and retaining drivers.